Welcome to the Humour and Games podcast, an analog and video games podcast about how humor is experienced, designed, and analyzed in games.
We are Scott DeYoung,
Mark Lajeunesse,
and Andre Zanescu,
and we'll be your guides in this 6-episode series. Throughout each episode, we'll break down different theories and forms of humor. We'll draw on interviews with designers, critics, and academics as they discuss the different aspects of humor, their own lived experiences, and how their work utilizes humor in games. In this episode, we talk with Dietrich Squinkifer, aka Squinky, about their various new media projects that have explored games about feelings and capitalist dystopia.
Just get started with the general intro question, which is, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? And that can be around your work or whatever you'd like us to know.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm Squinky, which is short for Dietrich Squinkifer. I'm an independent game designer, and I make games primarily as an art practice, whether alone or with trusted friends. I'm also a lapsed academic. I used to work in the video game industry too. And I tend to bring queer, transgender, neurodivergent, and racialized perspectives into my work.
That's amazing. That's such a concise answer, too.
Well, thank you for giving me the questions ahead of time so that I could make notes and be more coherent.
Yeah. And that being said, if you ever want to go on like topics that weren't inside the questions, that's also fine, too.
Sure. We'll play it by ear.
Yeah. So I guess since we're talking about humor in games today, I suppose one of the easier questions to ask is, what's a game that comes to mind when you think about humorous games?
Yeah. So there are a lot of games that do come to mind, but I guess the ones that stand out to me and that I have historically found very inspiring in terms of my own work have been the LucasArts adventure games of the 90s, like Monkey Island and Day of the Tentacle and Sam and Max and Grim Fandango. So those were very, very formative games for me. And they are also great examples of where a lot of humor was built into the game mechanics and the puzzles. That definitely had an impact on me.
That's awesome. I'd never thought about Grim Fandango and your work, but that makes so much sense after spending some time looking at your catalog. Sounds like such a perfect fit. So, I mean, you've been dealing with games in so many different ways, so many different perspectives too, as a practitioner and an academic, and now an independent artist. So, I guess, what does humor mean to you when we're talking about games or any kind of art practice or just regular life, really?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. One thing, I think there are a lot of different kinds of humor. The kinds of humor that I find that I really resonate with and that I try to bring into my art practice include humor around the absurd or unexpected, especially because absurdism in humor is kind of having a cultural moment right now because we live in such an absurd, confusing, and chaotic world at the moment. And I think this also includes things like the resurgence of wholesomeness and meme culture, when you live in a world where you expect people to be mean and cruel, there can be this element of unexpected pleasant surprise in people just being kind and nice. And so I really love that kind of comedy. I also really enjoy satire. I like mocking institutions abusing power and people abusing power. And I also really like bodily functions. I love like jokes about poop and farting and awkward sex and like and what I really love about this kind of like crude bodily humor is there is kind of like this universal nature to it. Like it's like everyone has to deal with bodies being weird and doing gross things. And like it doesn't discriminate. And I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also like also in general, like one thing is like being funny is a coping mechanism I have used for a long time in order to get people to like me. And I definitely bring that into my games.
That's I hadn't even thought about that kind of variety in different kinds of humor. Like that you could put into a game, but it makes so much sense when I hear you talk about it.
Yeah, like I definitely have this mix of highbrow and lowbrow for sure.
So when you're starting a game project or an art project, are you starting with a theme and then humor sort of emerges naturally from that theme, or are you thinking about I wanted to have this kind of humor first, or is it all kind of mixed? How do you go about it?
Well, like it really depends in a lot of ways. Kind of like yeah, it depends on the context behind like how and where and with whom I am developing a game. Like sometimes it is like just as simple of like, wouldn't it be funny if we made a game about something that we don't generally make games about? And other times, I kind of like, I guess, like start with more of like a feeling or like an aesthetic or I guess like whatever stories emerge out of that. And then like humor just becomes a part of it because humor is a part of life. And when you're trying to express some kind of like story, some kind of feeling through a game, you want to draw on life. So it's like kind of like sometimes it is like very specific and sometimes it is very general.
Yeah. Do you I mean, going over your catalog, you have so many different kinds of formats, and I've seen that some of your games are solo projects and some are more collaborative. Do you feel like that impacts the kinds of humor that you put into your game, or is it really how do I explain it? Is it more just that you have a clear vision for the project that doesn't really get that compromise, I suppose?
Well, I guess like no matter what I'm doing, I bring myself and my personality into the experience. So if I'm working on a game by myself, it's definitely all about me. But if I'm working on a game with other people, like I bring myself into it, but it's also like the other people I'm with and our relationship and like what happens when like what happens in our relationship.
Yeah, makes so much sense. I suppose I'm asking because I'm trying to figure out, the process of how it goes from being like a project that you kind of have a vision for into something that exists in the world. And like
Mm.
at what point do you feel like, you've achieved humor, or if it's just throughout the process, like how do you is there some kind of measurable threshold when you feel like it's funny enough for you?
Um, uh, So that's also like a hard thing to gauge, but one of the things I do look for is like, how do I feel about the process? Like when I am working on this, does it spark joy? Does it make me kind of like giggle to myself inside? Does it make other people giggle when I tell them what the game is about? And when I'm making the game with other people, it becomes about like, are we laughing and having fun as we're working on this? Obviously, maybe not all the time, because like sometimes like there's definitely a lot of work involved in making a game. But like yeah, in general, like are we having fun doing this work together? Because like I think the end product, like the process in any kind of art, the process like comes through in the final product.
Yeah. I I mean, we've had a couple of classes together, but I don't think I'd seen your games in action as much as these last couple of days looking at them for the interview, and they're downright hilarious. Games
Oh,
like
thank you.
Chess for Men and Oppression Olympics had me chuckling inside my apartment.
Yeah,
I hope I didn't bother my neighbors. But I guess those are kind of serious games as well. So
definitely.
I I suppose, how do you thread the needle, between having these games be very funny and enjoyable to play, but also communicate serious topics, or topics that players should be attentive to?
Yeah. Well, so like the thing is, I kind of like my style of humor is very much like it's not all going to be light or dark. It's going to be balanced and nuanced. Like it's like so for me, like if you're trying to do something comedic without any like darkness, without any kind of like, it's like what is it say, like if it's not really saying something, if it's not really trying to express something, then it kind of just falls flat for me. Likewise, if something is just like completely serious, like okay, we are going to be serious now, then that is also like really boring, and not that interesting to me.
Yeah, that that seems to make so much sense. I mean, they have such a like, I don't know if whimsical is the right word, but I definitely had an element of like self-deriding humor when I was playing them. So I hope other players feel that way too.
I hope
Do you
so.
do you feel like, maybe for these specifically, but also for other games you've made, like that tension between the serious and the humorous part was sort of what you were thinking about most when you were making them, or was it more about the the topic, or 50-50, I guess?
Yeah. I guess like it just goes back to like this idea of humor as a coping mechanism. Like the way that I just deal with difficult and challenging stuff in life is like partly to like joke about it, and just to like kind of like zoom back out and like just notice just like how absurd the like situation is. So like yeah, and like for instance, the Oppression Olympics game was literally like based on like joke that people make about like how we talk about oppression in terms of it's like this group of people is more oppressed than that group, and we have to take care of this group before we can take care of that group. And so like a lot of the humor just like came from that joke that already existed. And then like something like Chess for Men was like it was actually a game that I made for an assignment back when I was still doing my PhD, and you were in that class as well. We're supposed to like design a game for another person, yeah, I designed that game specifically to make somebody uncomfortable.
I wish I would have played it in 2016 because it feels very relevant to then and now.
Yep.
Which is a bit sad about 2020, but
it's true.
So, I mean, you've been mentioning, and I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but you've been talking a lot about sort of humor as a coping mechanism and humor as a way to forge social ties to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like that's humor's primary function for you, or are there other aspects of humor that you like to work with or that appeal to you?
Yeah, well, I guess like there is definitely the social bonds aspect to it. And it's also kind of a way that like because humor is incredibly subjective, it's a way of like signaling who I am trying to communicate with, and I guess who my audience is. And so like I yeah, so I guess like I try to I try if my sense of humor is very much a product of like me and my circumstances and the people I am in community with. So like humor is kind of a way to like signal to members of communities I'm part of that like, hey, this is a game for you. And like when you're part of communities who don't like historically have a lot of like games made for them, or who aren't like the kind of audience that like big game companies have in mind when they make games, this is kind of a way of being like hey, this is a game for you.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and that's such a valuable way to look at it. I'm curious. I mean, I feel like your answer is adjacent to another question, which is sort of how do you feel about the meshing of humor and politics, or do you feel like humor in games is affected by political?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. There is like I think there are politics inherent in all kinds of humor. Like the questions to ask are kind of like, who is the target of this humor and what is being ridiculed? Who is in on the joke? Who is left out? So like questions like that are very relevant.
Yeah, and I suppose if one of the questions that you're asking yourself, or that you would expect people to ask when looking at your games, is, who is this communicating with, and who is this trying to forge bonds with? Do you feel like sometimes humor in games can also be hurtful towards other people or exclusionary in some way?
Oh, definitely. It's like I have definitely like experienced jokes like in games, but also in general, that are like meant to hurt people or mock people like me, like jokes against trans people, like like making fun of fat people, making fun of disabled people, like making fun of neurodivergent people, and like that is something like that kind of grew up with a lot of that kind of humor, and it was like I didn't understand at the time like how hurtful it was, but like it definitely fed into like a lot of like internalized self-hatred, and that is absolutely something that I don't want to express in my own work. I don't want to like um, hurt anyone who doesn't deserve it, honestly.
Yeah. I'm really sorry that that was the experience growing up. I wonder, you were mentioning earlier sort of this resurgence of wholesome humor and wholesome memes. Do you feel like that resurgence is in part as pushback against this kind of, punching down kind of humor?
Absolutely. That is like, and that's like kind of definitely one of the things that like I absolutely love about the wholesome meme culture. And it's like kind of playing again with the with the absurd, like and unexpected. Like it's like, oh, you're coming in here like expecting cruelty, but instead you get kindness, and that's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, I kind of wish that was the humor culture growing up that I saw. I think I what I saw was a lot more negative. So
Same.
I'm so. Do you see like the use of this kind of wholesome humor sort of as an educational tool in your games? Like, do you feel like you're using it to communicate something to players or to teach them about something?
Um, uh, well, yes and no. So like I don't necessarily go into it with a deliberately pedagogical mindset, but in terms of like learning in general, like I love learning things. I hope that people learn things. Like a huge part of communication with other human beings is learning new things, and and appreciating perspectives that you might not have considered because you haven't had the same lived experiences. Yeah, like I think yeah, my games are educational in the sense that like any conversation with another person would be educational.
Yeah. No, I think that's really a valuable way to look at sort of communicating that doesn't have to be like scaffolded by like a teaching pedagogical regimen of some kind. So it seems as though the way you approach like humor in games really seems to be from a lived experience perspective or something that speaks to you. Do you do you ever engage with like theories of humor or have like some more abstract conceptualization of how humor is deployed, or is it really practical for you?
Yeah. Well, there is like I guess like theory like comes from somewhere, comes from some kind of practical experience. And like I guess one of the things that I think about is like design, and like how to design and like an interactive experience that expresses something humorous. I think like doing something unexpected with like controls, like using alt controls, and like making things like too easy or too hard on purpose. Like those can all express a lot of different things, and like can be ways of like just like getting somebody, like having someone play something and like as they're playing they'll just like laugh. It's like wow, this is so weird and unexpected. So like yeah, thinking in terms of thinking about design, that's something I draw on. Like humor is not just at the level of text or like non-interactive content. I definitely think that the interactivity is a huge part of it.
Yeah. So do you, I mean, your games seem to span like a fair amount of different kinds of technologies, different kinds of formats. Do you think like that has like significant impact on how you're trying to convey your humor? Like what objects you can work with or what formats?
Oh, absolutely. And like it also like I guess like using materials that you wouldn't expect to like play a video game with, like can be definitely this vehicle for humor. Like one of my favorite examples is Rustle Your Leaves to Me Softly, which I made with Jess Marcotte, where basically you caress a plant and put on some headphones and the plant will like whisper ASMR poetry to you. And it's like hilarious and intimate and kind of uncomfortable and weird, but also very delightful.
Yeah, that, oh my God. I imagine I would be immediately red-faced if I was demoing.
Yes. A lot of people got that reaction, especially like since we've shown the game in public places.
So I'm curious, like, do you feel like the kind of humor that you like to integrate in your games gravitates towards specific kinds of genres or like storytelling formats?
Yeah. Well, so I guess like that the most succinct way of putting this is that like I started with adventure games. And adventure games as a genre are like games where like the story is the point and what you do in the game like directly relates to what you're doing in the story. And while like most of my games like aren't like classic adventures per se at this point, that's like kind of like where I come from. So like usually when I like when I'm designing a game, I don't necessarily like start with the genre. Like I don't necessarily go in and say like oh, I'm going to make a platformer now, or like I'm going to make a first person shooter or whatever. I'm kind of like it's like I want this game to be a platformer because I want to express something through this game being a platformer. I want to express something about like the feeling of like playing like Mario as a kid, but then subverting that experience somehow.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
so much
and
sense.
like I'm not thinking about like making a good platformer. I'm thinking about like what can I express through the experience of making a platformer.
Yeah. So the mechanics are in service of the narrative content or the feeling that you want to convey.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Um, I you've talked a little bit about also showing these games or demoing them in public, and I'm curious how you feel about sort of the meeting point between your games and audiences. Like, do you feel like the audience is crucial for your design process, or is it more something that you make for yourself and then the audience will either like it or not?
I guess it's kind of both. Like, it's like I put a lot of myself into my games, but the reason I'm making games in the first place is so that I can share them with others and so I can communicate something to others. So I am thinking about my audience, but I'm also thinking about it's like I'm not necessarily thinking about creating something universal because that doesn't actually exist. I'm thinking about it's like especially as a kid, like growing up pretty lonely and misunderstood for a lot of reasons. Like one of my driving forces when I decided to start making art and games and sharing it with other people is like I want to find other people who are like me and who understand like my experiences and what I've gone through and my sense of humor. Because a lot of games, a lot of art aren't necessarily made with people like me in mind. So yes, I am thinking about my audience, but I am trying to kind of with the intent of finding my people, if that makes any sense.
No, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I don't know if your game or like your games or the way that you play games has interacted a lot with like live streaming culture and those kinds of audiences, which might be sort of like a second audience, like people watching other people playing your games or other games.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, like I love the idea of people streaming my games. It is not always easy to watch people stream my games, especially if it's games I made like several years ago. It can kind of like the consequence of putting so much of myself into my games is that like watching people play games from when I was younger can sometimes have that cringe factor of like, oh, they've got my old graduation pictures out and judging me based on that rather than who I am now. It's like I'm really proud of the Dominique Pamplemousse games, but they were also made before I medically transitioned. So, listening to my voice at a higher pitch is always going to be a little bit cringy.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It really seems like for you that the humor that you put in the games and the games themselves are such a big part of your life and how you would like to interact with people. I think that's just wonderful.
I love that a lot. And I guess that's also part of why it took me a much longer time to feel comfortable making games with other people because like I kind of had to spend a lot of time figuring out my own voice and also like figuring out myself because like kind of part of being trans and not realizing it for like a big part of your life is that you'd have to do a lot more work in figuring out who you are and that goes for a lot of lived experiences that are I guess like outside of what is considered the norm in society but but yeah, it is had to get to a certain point before I could feel comfortable like making games with other people and working on these collaborative experiences that are like not just about me, but about like me and other people and our relationship.
Yeah. Do you think that's because there's maybe a degree of vulnerability when you're sharing this kind of personal humor and very emotional content that's going into your games?
Absolutely. Like I feel like all art worth experiencing just really does require a degree of vulnerability.
Yeah. Wow. I feel like I should go back and play your games again now that we've
Oh.
had this talk to sort of see them with different eyes, I guess.
Mm.
I think we're at the end of like the prepped questions, and we sort of have a wrap up one, but I want to give a chance to either Scott or Mark if they had anything they wanted to ask.
Yeah, how do your experiences in the industry differ from making games on your own?
So my experiences in industry are very much like, so you're like when you're making a game that's primarily commercial, the way you think about audiences is really different from like how I think about audiences when like I make games as an independent art practice. And like, yeah, basically you want to do the capitalism thing, and like it's like think about like what will appeal to the most people, who will then spend money and like and make your studio more money, and like that's not necessarily I'm pretty like I mean I'm pretty dismissive of capitalism in general, but like there is a kind of like one thing, like there is not really like such a thing as universal, honestly, for the most part. Like I guess like I found that the way that people think about like way that people think about designing games and like what kinds of humor to put into it, it is like it's a much more deliberate and much less organic process a lot of the time. And that is unless you have like I don't know, like I guess like an auteur type developer on your team who happened to like lead a team or make something that happened to like gain a huge fan base, and like and so people are kind of like this is it's like, oh, this worked before, let's try it again. um and there's also like there can be a lot more focus testing, bringing groups of people in and like gauging their feedback, and yeah, it is like very much like instead of trying to like express something, like instead of trying to communicate something, um your goal is to please an imagined audience. And that's kind of like my sense of things. Well, I have seen that vary in like the past couple of decades or so that I have been involved in games and games culture. Like some of the work that I'm doing at the moment is diversity consulting, which signals that like a lot more commercial game companies are interested in like it's like all right, we've been neglecting a lot of audiences, but we're at a point in like we're at a point now where maybe we don't want to leave people out. Maybe we want to be more inclusive. Maybe we don't want to unintentionally hurt anyone or intentionally hurt anyone. So I guess like what I do mainly like with smaller companies and organizations. I don't generally work for AAA studios, that though that might change in the future, who knows. But I guess like so what I do as a diversity consultant is I guess like I figure out where people are, like what like it's like what is the team trying to express, because like there are varying degrees here. Like what I talked about, it's not just a binary of like trying to please an audience versus trying to like express something specific. There are varying degrees in between that, right? So I guess like so one of the things I do is like find out where people are, and then from where they are, like, okay, here are ways that you can be more inclusive. Here are ways you can tweak your language so that you will be less alienating to non-binary people, for instance. And here is, and like, yeah, here are some suggestions for like how you might want to think about some of the assumptions that you're making. And like obviously like as a consultant, like it's like I'm there to give advice and they can take it or leave it. But yeah, that is like one of the ways that I kind of bridge that gap.
While we have you, could you talk a bit about your game Robot Slow Dance?
Yeah. So, Robot Slow Dance is a game that gave me a lot of joy to make. So basically, the premise is, what if Rock'em Sock'em robots, but instead of fighting robots, they were awkwardly slow dancing flirty robots. So they're I have kind of like using motors and arcade controls. I've sort of developed this like physical animatronic game in a suitcase where you like move these robots around. They are like kind of like standing like a bit apart from each other with their arms stretched out, not quite touching, like definitely like saving room for Jesus or whatever. But yeah, like but also like them not touching is intentional because I didn't want players to damage the robots by whacking them against each other like you can with something like Rock'em Sock'em robots. And so like as you're dancing, the robots have these like procedurally generated flirty quips that are like it's like, what would a robot say if they were like if they were trying to flirt with another robot, like talking about their microprocessors or like complimenting their servos and stuff like that. And like actually if you move the robots in sync with each other, then their dialogue gets like a lot more flirty, which is something that people maybe don't necessarily notice if they are sort of like just one-off, like trying out the game. But like if you kind of like if you spend a lot of time with it, that's like one of the things that you can discover. And yeah, it lasts about 2 minutes, like about like less than a length of a song, but like the music is kind of like this loop of the intro to the song True by Spandau Ballet, and like very iconic like MIDI version of this like '80s riff that everybody recognizes. It's like, oh yes, this is a slow dance.
So I guess our last question is like the generic interview wrap-up question, which is there anything that we didn't ask you about and you would have wanted us to ask you about, or anything that you'd like to bring up before we wrap?
Let me consult my notes. So yeah, I guess like one thing is that I guess I kind of mentioned this before tangentially, but to make it more expressive, like one of my aims when I make games is to tell the truth, and like to specifically to tell the truth about my experiences as I've lived them. And sometimes the truth is hilarious. And yeah, that's one of the reasons why I like part of my approach to humor is that it is like rooted in truth, or what I see as truth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. As for other things, sometimes things can be unintentionally funny, but maybe that's not necessarily what you want. As a game designer, you want things to be intentional. So, like, if somebody finds something unintentionally funny about like something that you express, whether in a game or otherwise, sometimes I find it interesting to like interrogate why that is. Like, what? Okay, they are laughing. I didn't intend for this to be funny. Why is this funny? And sometimes the answer is actually kind of hurtful, but sometimes it like tells you something like very valuable. So I guess that is like, yeah, another thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. I suppose that goes back to when we were talking about, the potential for humor to be hurtful. But I think maybe we imagined it as people making jokes that are hurtful, not people finding things humorous in a way that might be hurtful to the person making the game, which is really an interesting flip.
Yeah, exactly. And like, it's like, so like, I guess one example of this is like, if I have seen a lot of people like playing a game and making fun of it because it's a bad game. And like, and by bad, I guess means like there are a lot of assumptions put into that. Like, this game was made by people who aren't skilled at developing games, and then like, but also like presupposing a certain goal that isn't necessarily like what was trying to be expressed here, if that makes any sense. So like, and like I've had this like directed at my own work as well. Like there were a bunch of like Steam comments for Dominique Pamplemousse that was like, oh, this is just like a lazy flash game. Why is this like? Why does this cost money? And yeah, like another part of that is that like if you if you make a game that doesn't have like it's like what is perceived to be high production values and like a certain like standard or type of gameplay and aesthetic, then it should not cost money. Well, I mean, like I already like have a very strange have a strained relationship with capitalism. If we didn't have to pay money for anything, that would be nice. But because of the reality we live in, it does say a lot about like what we value, and what like people who play games value, and it becomes this feedback loop where game companies in the industry are less likely to try out or express ideas that they know that like this audience will mock or make fun of, and yeah, so that's also a huge part of it.
Do you feel like that's maybe because it seems to me almost as though like the correspondence of like what people think a game should look like, should play like, the kinds of jokes that should be in it is kind of like a certain form of literacy, and when things challenge
Absolutely.
that,
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess I think like modern art as an example, usually like there is so much art that is trying to express something very particular and is drawing upon a rich artistic tradition and is in dialogue with other art in that same kind of vein. But like if a layperson looks at it, they'll be like, oh, my kid can paint that or whatever. So I guess it's kind of like there's a little bit of that in play, and I think that is something like games in particular. There is so much more potential for literacy to be developed beyond this very like narrow level, which is like one of the things that is one of the reasons why like I try to make games that aren't necessarily for gamers, and that I have like tried to show my work in like I guess like more like art venues, like maybe like not necessarily the same games festivals all the time, but communities, like community events, like scene fairs or yeah. So like yeah, bringing games to like people who aren't familiar with games culture but may be more open to like different things that games can express, and who may also be like a lot more literate in other artistic traditions outside of games and can bring that lens into what they play.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense to me. I mean, I think, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great.
Yeah. I mean, that's all I had, but like this interview has blown my mind.
Oh, thank you. I love blowing minds. It's fun. uh, Oh yes, I would love to. So I'm currently working on an album of short games called Second Puberty. Um, and yeah, basically it's a planned collection of 7 games. Why 7? Very arbitrary reason, but it seemed like a good number to do. And like it's a bunch of games about medically transitioning, which I started doing about like a little over 2 years ago. Um, and but also like dealing with the feelings coming out of like ways my life and my experiences and my ways of moving through the world have like changed since then, but also like causing me to reflect on my past and what brought me to this point. And also like, yeah, dealing with this weird world we now find ourselves in. So like I didn't plan these games out ahead of time. I just kind of like work on one at a time. And so like I really appreciate how that's kind of allowed me room to like react to like major world events, like suddenly being in lockdown, okay, like, and the feelings that come out of that. Like I have finished the first two games, which are called Super Modesty Brothers and Hold in Your Farts or Die. And I am currently working on the third game, which is called An Introvert Goes to a Party.
Oh God.
Like if you want to support me, like my continued development of this game, like I'm giving like people who support me on Patreon early access to the games as they get finished, but then everybody else like has to play the whole thing when it's done. And I am also like I have also like recently like started a collective with Jess Marcotte and Allison Cole and various guest artists called Soft Chaos, and we've been developing LARPs and like various like experiences. So we like last year we created a LARP called This Is Fine about networking during the networking at a conference during the literal apocalypse, which is like, oh god, this game is becoming more and more real like since we developed it. And we also have been working on Strangers on the Net, which is a Discord-based it's a Discord-based LARP where you are in a chat room in 1999 and role-playing as like particular 90s fandom like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Sailor Moon. And we've run that experience a few times, and it's always been like this really beautiful, like nostalgic, cathartic experience. So next time we run that game, I recommend getting in on it.
That was our interview with Squinky. Thanks again to the Tag Lab for supporting this series, and thanks to you for listening.